We are joined with the man, the legend, Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, whistleblower. Scott Ritter, how you doing, Scott? You doing okay, man?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm better that you are here. In fact, give me one moment to adjust the audio. I want to get this right. There we are. Scott, there's reporting that's come out. I think it was either this morning or yesterday that Trump has suspended intelligence. The CIA has confirmed they're no longer giving intelligence. HIMARS information is no longer being distributed to Ukraine, also. And apparently, Donald Trump is in talks with opposition. I want to go with the first one first, though. What is the significance of withholding intelligence from Ukraine in addition to the military aid that we're no longer giving to them?
Well, one of the Russians have always said, "Look, we're willing to talk with the United States at any time. Diplomacy is always an answer, but it's difficult to talk with somebody who's actively trying to strategically defeat you, especially if you're going to be talking about stability and such." The fact of the matter is, the United States is in a proxy war with Russia, using Ukraine as the proxy. Uh, I was put on several Ukrainian death lists for saying that back in the day. I've said it from day one. Um, but gosh, it was the Secretary of State Marco Rubio who said it yesterday. He said, "No, we're in a proxy war against Russia, and it has to stop." Um, and that's just the case. You can't have constructive dialogue with a nation when you're at war with it. Um, you know, it's that's just the reality. So, one of the things that constitutes our being in an active state of conflict with Russia is that we are actively participating in the targeting of Russia by Ukraine. And we do that not only by the provision of weapons, but by these weapons, as Vladimir Putin has said several times, these weapons don't do what they're supposed to do without American intelligence. The targeting data, not just where to hit, but how to hit, the digital information that makes the weapon go where it goes. This is all a product of U.S. intelligence. And the United States is trying to set the table properly for successful negotiations. And the first step of that is to tell the Russians, we aren't your enemy anymore. I mean, Sergei Lavrov came out and said, the United States is not our friend right now. We don't have friendly relations with the United States. We're working on establishing normal diplomatic contact, but it's easier to do that with somebody that you're not in war with. And so that's what's happening. This goes hand in glove with the instructions given by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, to cease offensive cyber warfare activities against Russia, which we were doing. So what we're doing is sending a signal to the Russians that we no longer view you as an enemy, as an adversary that we're seeking to strategically destroy, to defeat. We view you as a nation we wish to live in peace and harmony with. And we need to get this war over, and we're trying to create the conditions so that the Russians can trust us as counterparts, as colleagues in this joint effort. You can't talk about walking side by side with somebody while you're stabbing them in the back, And this is an essential step for the United States to create it's a confidence building measure that tells the Russians that we are serious about peace.
No, I do get that. I guess what I'm asking is, what is the significance on the military, on the battlefield? Like, Russia is still moving. They're still taking territory. They're still on the battlefield, still advancing. So yeah. So, like, what does it mean for the Ukrainian military to no longer get U.S. intelligence, or for that matter, to no longer get military aid? How long can they even last without these things being in place?
Well, let's be honest here. The number of HIMARS systems and ATACMS, these are the two systems that are primarily, detrimentally impacted by this. There's not that many of them. They were never in sufficient quantities to have a meaningful impact on the battlefield. This is a very, very large battlefield, an extremely large battlefield. And on the occasions when HIMARS were used, yes, you had a momentary tactical advantage for the Ukrainians where they were able to fire, HIMARS with cluster munitions that killed, 34 Russians. Yay, good job, Ukraine. And then the Russians kept advancing because it's war and you lose people in war. And killing 34 Russians or killing 56 Russians or killing 16 Russians at a time, it's bad for the families of those dead Russians. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't change the trajectory of this conflict. This is a war being fought on a scope and scale that many Americans can't possibly imagine. And, for every HIMARS attack, there's a Russian, guided bomb attack, or their own multiple launch rocket systems, or their artillery that's killing thousands of Ukrainians. The death exchange is not equal between the two parties, and Russia continues to. So this is more of a psychological thing for the Ukrainians than actually, the death knell. Don't expect the Ukrainian military to fold overnight because they've lost the only thing that allows them to resist. The most effective weapon that the Ukrainians have is the drone. And, these drones are made by the Ukrainians using tactics developed by the Ukrainians. So they don't lose that. Their long-range drone strike capability is impacted because the intelligence that was used to not necessarily find the target. Anybody can find the target. It's how you get to the target, the path you take. You have to weave your way through Russian air defense systems that are constantly moving. And so the U.S. was providing real-time intelligence to the Ukrainians that enabled these drones to penetrate Russian air defense and strike these, these oil refineries deep inside Russia. That is not going to be happening. The queuing that the Ukrainians would get with their air defense, for instance, the Patriot, in an ideal situation, the Patriot's pinging 24/7 with its radar, so that when you fire something, the radar picks it up and you get the maximum efficient intercept, solution. But the problem is, if you're pinging with your radar, then the anti-radiation weapons that the Russians have come flying in and blow up the radar, and that's it. So what's happened is there's an arrangement made, not just with the Patriot, but with all air defense, where the air defense is in dormant status. And then the United States superimposes with its intelligence the ability to detect Russian launches and provide early warning about the location of the launch, the direction that the weapon's coming in, so that the Ukrainians can vector their air defense, prepare, and as the weapon enters intercept, umbrella or a window of opportunity for intercept, they can throw out their radar, grab the weapon, the weapon, fire the missiles, and then shut down the radar, and then move the radar so that the Russians can't destroy the radar. That doesn't happen now because we've taken away that intelligence. And that means that either the Ukrainian air defense are going to stay in dormant status and not have any chance whatsoever, or they're going to have to become more aggressive with the use of their own radars, which opens up a window of vulnerability for their destruction. So it's a bad thing for Ukrainian air defense. And the same thing holds with their Air Force. The whole F-16 program is predicated on the F-16s getting guidance and direction from the United States, equivalent to, for instance, when our aircraft go up in the air, we have an AWACS aircraft, airborne warning and control aircraft, that big airplane with the big dome on top that's spinning around, and it's collecting all the intelligence and shooting that to the fighters so they have total battlefield awareness of what the enemy's doing. But if you shut down that AWACS, the plane goes blind, and it's a much more difficult fight. For the Ukrainians, for them getting up, they have the equivalent of AWACS with the American intelligence that's in consolidated, and there's communication and all that. That's done. So now the F-16s that the Ukrainians have are going to be flying blind when they take off. Not a good situation. So overall, this is not a good thing for the Ukrainians. The U.S. provided weaponry that whose effective use is contingent upon the provision of this intelligence data. Those weapons aren't going to perform as desired.
Well, they also froze the weapons. So it's not just the intelligence. They also froze weapons.
They froze the shipment of the weapons. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, Ukraine still has a significant stockpile of weapons. But this is problematic for many things. For instance, any weapon system, when you use it, requires maintenance. Right. And that maintenance requires a combination of technical skill on the part of the maintainers and a stockpile of spare parts. And what you're going to see is that in those areas where the United States was providing the technical skill, that's not being provided anymore. And the stockpile of spare parts burns out very quick. And if there's nothing to replace, then what happens is all these weapons basically just ground down, become unusable, get withdrawn from the battlefield, and then you lose. So all the M1 tanks that we've provided, all the Bradley fighting vehicles, all the Strykers, all the howitzers, the HIMARS, anything that we've provided that it requires maintenance. And the U.S. military uses very advanced equipment, sophisticated equipment that requires constant maintenance. To give you an example, the Stryker infantry fighting vehicle, it's a wheeled vehicle, and the suspension system that it has is it's a not hydraulic but pneumaticus thing, but it's constantly going up and down based upon the terrain. It has to be maintained. I mean, it's a nightmare for American soldiers in garrison, because if you don't maintain it properly, the wheels don't get the clearance, and then they puncture, and the thing doesn't work. And it's just, for American soldiers, it's just a nightmare. The Ukrainians now are responsible for that, and they have their manuals. But if you don't get those spare parts, if you don't get, and I'm talking about, there's that old saying, for the one of a nail, the horseshoe came off, then the horse wasn't available, so the rider didn't come in, the cavalry charge didn't happen, and we lost the war. So the one of a little gadget is going to prevent the Stryker from being maintained. So the Strykers pull from the battlefield, and when you pull all 94 of them or 130 of them from the battlefield, because none of them work anymore, now you're talking about a significant depletion of capability. So this is a big deal. We're basically shutting down the Ukrainian war machine, and within a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the Ukrainians won't be able to continue fighting this war. Mm-hmm. But this is more than just about HIMARS and ATACMS. This is about the whole big picture.
Yeah, and I guess I don't think I've had you on ever since Zelensky's meeting with Donald Trump. Give me a take on that before I move to another issue. I just want to get a few moments of your perspective of Zelensky having what I call a bitch fit in the Oval Office, and Donald Trump effectively giving him an intervention, him and Vance. What are your thoughts on that? And keep in mind, all of this that's taking place now in regards to cutting support, cutting intelligence, is a direct result from that meeting. Give me your thoughts on that meeting.
Well, see, I don't think that meeting occurred in isolation. There's many people who are like, oh my God, that meeting was supposed to go so well, and then it blew up, and oh geez. I think this was an ambush, straight up ambush. Everything that happened.
Do you? But they were like, they spent most of that meeting with no issue. And Zelensky seemingly was chomping at the bit to relitigate that contract. But why do you think it was an ambush?
Because the president of the United States doesn't walk into any meeting like that unprepared. Let me just set this up.
Yeah.
When the president of the United States goes to the General Assembly of the United Nations to make his speech, and then sit around New York for a couple weeks or a couple days to meet with world leaders and all this, the National Security Agency and the CIA support this by intercepting every communication, every conversation, everything that happens in New York leading up to that, so that when the president sits down with the world leader, he knows exactly what's the agenda of the world leader. Exactly. The president is in 100% control of the meeting. The meeting doesn't happen unless the president's in control. And the president's in control by knowing everything you are thinking, planning, etc., and having a counter to that. That's why we don't lose. It's not fair. It's not right. But we don't lose because we are better prepared. Because when we walk into a meeting, we are 100% in control of that meeting.
Right.
Zelensky, who campaigned actively against the president when he was candidate Trump, Zelensky, who conspired with Europe and NATO to undermine the policies of this president. Zelensky, who badmouthed the president and his policies, who lied to the president of the United States, now has a meeting with the president of the United States, and you think the president's going to go in and just say, let's just wing it? That doesn't happen. Okay, we have an agenda. Zelensky doesn't have an agenda. That's what you need to understand when you meet with the president of the United States. We have an agenda. You don't. Now, there's nations that have stature that both sides have an agenda, and there's mutual respect. I'd say when he meets with Vladimir Putin, we're not in control of that meeting. We're in control to the extent we can be. We're collecting all that intelligence on Putin, but he's collecting it all on us too, and both sides are well prepared. And there's also agreement beforehand what the agenda is, so there are no surprises. So the meeting is a carefully orchestrated, choreographed gathering. That's okay. That's one way to do this. But we're not partners with Zelensky. He's the enemy. That's what you need to understand. When Zelensky came into the White House, he was the enemy of the United States, the enemy of this president. And we knew it. This is a man who doesn't want peace. This is a man who's actively conspiring with other enemies of the United States named Macron and Starmer to undermine the policies of the United States, policies which the president believes are existential in nature, because we're trying to stop a world war with Russia. And anybody who's in the way of that is actually trying to foment a world war, therefore destroy us. This is part of a broader strategy that Trump had put out there, because nothing happens in a vacuum. Zelensky isn't isolated. It's about Zelensky Europe, Zelensky NATO. It's about the whole relationship the United States has with the collective West that we've been working with to use Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. And again, as I said, Marco Rubio now has admitted we are at a proxy war with Russia, and that people on our side are in this war as well, Europe, etc. We want this war to end. They don't. So we began this process by sending Pete Hegseth to NATO and by sending J.D. Vance to Munich. And they went in there and I've written about this. I view this as, diplomatic maneuver warfare. This is ideological warfare, intellectual warfare, whatever you want to call it. But the key to this is get inside your opponent's decision-making cycle. You don't want to walk into an ambush. Pete Hegseth doesn't want to come into NATO and go, well, I'm just going to sit down and listen to what NATO has to say. Because what happens is NATO acts, now you're reacting. And now the OODA loop is against you. The tightening of the circle ends up with you being shot down by NATO. No, you come into NATO, sweep the table clean, and throw something out there, and NATO's going, oh, God, we didn't understand it well. And now they're reacting to you. And then you just leave them and walk away in chaos. J.D. Vance goes into Munich, not to sit there and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and, oh, we love you, come together for the group hug.
No, he put the hammer down. Yeah.
Clean up yours. We're done. You suck. We're finished. I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about your lack of democratic values. You guys suck. You're the worst. And then he left. And they're like, oh, God, God, we don't know what to do. And okay, now Zelensky's playing stupid games. And so now Zelensky says, yes to the mineral deal, no to the mineral deal. We send the Secretary of Treasury in. He embarrasses the Secretary of Treasury. You think he's a friend? You think we're going to let him come into the White House and set the agenda? We gathered every piece of intelligence about Zelensky. We know every time he snorts cocaine, every time he passes gas, you name it, we know it. We knew he was. Think of the psychological warfare. This is a man who said right from the start, I will never wear a suit so long as Ukraine is at war, because this is a symbol of our national virility. I am a warrior leader. I am the new Churchill. I am wearing this. I will never lose it. We came and said, hey, you got to wear a suit. Imagine the psychological warfare there. What do you mean I got to wear a suit? I'm the great warrior. I have to wear green. Got to wear a suit. Well, I'm not going to wear a suit. You just set yourself up, because now what happened is, again, do you think that White House poll reporter just out of the blue said,
no,
don't you own a suit?
That guy was a plant.
Now you understand. Yeah. That guy was there, and he was going to ask that question if Zelensky didn't wear a suit.
Yeah.
It was set up. The whole thing was set up. Everything. They said they set up the room in the back. They knew Zelensky couldn't sign the deal. because Zelensky had already signed the deal with the British.
With the
And the British
Brits.
and Zelensky were in a panic on how do they get her through this, because they betrayed America, signed the deal, and now America's saying you got to sign a deal with us. And Zelensky's like, I can't do two things at once. What do I do? And so he's sitting there, and Trump is just sitting there bringing it on. Hey, we're just going to have this little conversation. Don't worry. Then we're going to go into the back room. And Zelensky, I don't want to go in the back room. I don't want to go in the back room. I don't want to go in the back room. And they're blah, 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 blah. And then they set this whole thing up. Zelensky said what he said. Trump brings down the hammer. And then, again, the vice president of the United States' role is never to steal the spotlight from the president. The vice president will never voluntarily interject himself in a way that makes the president look weak or inefficient. So for the vice president to speak in that form with cameras to the world, he was told what to say, when to say it. And Donald Trump, like the good WWF fan that he is, just tagged J.D. Vance in, who came in and got the hammer down. And it was all over for Zelensky. Finished, because they know his mind. They've played him, and he was just played like a fine-tooth fiddle. The United States is in control of this. Everything that's happening is because we want it to happen. It looks ugly because chaos is ugly. But remember, we don't want Europe to be the ones calling the shots.
Right.
There's an emergency meeting right now in Europe taking place today that just exposes them as the weak, useless, effeminate losers that they are collectively. That meeting, why is it happening? Because Europe decided that they were going to stand up and be strong. It's happening because they're reacting to us. We set the agenda there. The United States did. By everything we did. Europe's doing exactly what we want them to do. And we know what the outcome will be because we collect intelligence on every single one of those pathetic losers. They're so loser. They can't actually go through a day without calling each other. I mean, imagine how easy this is. If I'm a collector, I mean, normally I'm like, okay, is he going to use a burner phone?
Yeah, it's like, what is this guy thinking in the moment? Yeah.
Scan. Where is he? We got something. Get him in there. Factor it in. Get it. Oh, crap. We only got the end of the conversation. We don't know what's going on. No, these guys make it easy. Oh, hello, Emmanuel Macron. Yes, how you doing? Yes. Those Americans, those dirty Americans, we're going to get them. We're going to conspire. I'm going to call Keir Starmer. I'm going to tell him he must do this. And I'm just sitting there going, you guys are making this too easy. Send a fax. Yeah, send a fax. I mean, the point is, we're collecting everything. You do know that Europe is one giant American listening center. That the National Security Agency and the CIA have Europe wired like you wouldn't believe. We were listening to the private phone calls of Angela Merkel. We got caught out, but we were listening to them. Who else did we listen to? Everybody. Yeah. Nobody speaks. And it isn't. We have entire thousands of analysts right now in Fort Meade, Maryland, whose job in the morning is to get up and tell us what's for breakfast for everybody or whatever, because we're listening to everything. They write up little statements on what the mindset of these people are. That goes up to decision makers who consolidate it, and it gets briefed to the president and briefed to every other decision maker. We don't sit down in a meeting and not know exactly what's going on. Now, if the Europeans were clever, they could do deception. They could do a deception plan, but so that requires them to be in control of the momentum. Now, if you're on the winning side of the OODA loop, where you've acted and we're reacting, that gives you time to go, all right, now what's our next plan? We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. Okay, hey, let's implement the deception plan Alpha 1203. All right. Oh, poor Americans. We've just implemented the deception plan Alpha 1203. You're going to be reacting to that. Hey, Bravo 2 Charlie, bring that one in. We got the whole plan. We're ready because we're in charge. We're the ones making it happen. That's not the Europeans right now. They're the ones getting hammered by our plan. Everything they do is a reaction to what we have done. And that's so the White House meeting was 100% set up. It couldn't be any other way.
Interesting. So one of the other things that came on the marquee, Donald Trump is apparently in talks with allies, or let's say opponents of Zelensky. I'm fascinated by this one. I assume this was going to take place at some point. But he's apparently in talks with Timoshenko was one, Poroshenko was another one. And I want to piggyback this on the notion that Poroshenko came out, I believe this was a few weeks ago, and said that there are going to be elections in Ukraine. I think he said in October or something to that effect. I mean, this is obvious, right? If Zelensky, he is clearly an impediment. You called him an enemy. I agree with you on this. He is an impediment to peace. He doesn't necessarily want to go anywhere. He doesn't want to have elections, despite, and behind the scenes, there were elements of Trump team that says Zelensky should go to France and enjoy his wealth, leave. What's your take on this? From your point of view, are they going to be able to push him into elections?
Yes, we're in charge. He's not.
Yeah.
I just want to make that point again. We're in charge. He's not. Now, we don't get to go in and dictate solutions, but
Right.
what we do is we manipulate processes to get to where we want to get. Let me put it this way. There will be elections in Ukraine. That's a prerequisite for conflict termination. Now, it's interesting. Let's just break this down a little bit. Who the Trump people are talking to? Poroshenko. Yes, his name isn't Zelensky, but he's the one that
Yes.
lied about Minsk.
Yes.
So guess who will not be the president of Ukraine? Poroshenko. Timoshenko, same thing. She's a nationalist, right sector kind of person. She won't be president. But all the Russians want is for the United States to create the inevitability of elections. And then what's going to happen, this is my prediction, is that we're going to tag the Russians in at the appropriate time, and there will be elections. And their man, Medvedchuk, will win. And now they'll have the Russian-controlled president who will redo the Constitution and do all the changes that have to happen if denazification, demilitarization are going to take place, which are two Russian preconditions. See, we can't come in up front and say, this is the outcome. What we can say is there has to be presidential elections. And now we pretend that these people are going to be players. Hey, what do you think about elections? That's cool. How about you? Yeah, you guys, hey, why don't you work with us on this whole election thing? And now everybody goes, there's going to be elections. Good. You're not in, you're not in, you're not in, you're not, he's in. And now we have an outcome. That's, I think, the direction we're heading here. This is just setting the table.
Well, I was just going to say, from your take, from my understanding, opposition parties have been completely banned. And so the only people that would even be up potentially for an election are effectively these lunatics. As you pointed out, these people are on the far right. How's it going to work? I mean, I would imagine, explain that to me. Explain in your mind, how do you think that's going to work? Are they going to allow, let's say, opposition parties in, opposition media back in? At some point, those things are going to have to be allowed. Otherwise, you're just going to get another lunatic coming into play. Zelensky, for example, again, a nationalist. All of these people are effectively part of the Banderite fascist collection.
They're not going to be part of the future of Ukraine.
Yeah,
but you need them right now to construct the edifice of elections. You need to make elections, the process of an election, inevitable. And once that happens, then you basically say, yes, but thank you for the elections. But now we open up the rule book. None of you right-wing fanatic Banderas are allowed to participate because you lost the war. You see, right. Russia won the war, and Russia gets to dictate the outcomes. And Russia has said that you guys are all being purged. So kindly go over to the purging area, and Russia will bring in the genuine opposition, the ones that had to flee the country for their lives. The guy who's probably going to be president of Ukraine in a post-conflict environment is a Ukrainian politician who was arrested and beaten up and tortured. Yeah. And the Russians thought so highly of this man that they exchanged Azov Nazis that they captured in Mariupol, who should have been executed for their crimes. They exchanged them for this man. This man is now in Russia being briefed. And I think you're going to see that when there are elections, this man's going to be brought in, and the elections are going to be, stacked so that, he is the candidate. Russia's not looking for a democratic outcome yet. Russia's looking for an outcome that allows democracy to be built in the future, democracy that doesn't include Banderists, right sector, and these horrible people that have allowed ultra nationalism to infect all of Ukraine.
Can we talk about Macron for a moment?
Sure.
What a loser! He is so out of touch with reality. So Macron recently gave the speech to France, apparently, as if there's some significance of France, and he pointed out so right here, Macron is lying here. He's lying through his teeth. But I do want to get your take on it. I think this is in French.
And I welcome them.
Unfortunately, this is French, but
And we
the
need to
commentary is
continue
below.
to
But
help
he points
Ukraine
out effectively that the
resist
Minsk agreements, that
and
Putin can't be trusted because Putin apparently blew off the Minsk agreements. That is mind-blowing for a French leader to say that. Give me your take on that. Because even Sanders and many other people in the US come up with this construction that, well, Putin can't be trusted because he blew off agreements and he went in against all of these Minsk 1 and 2 agreements. Go into that for me. Explain that. I've pointed out on my show before, but you probably can give a better explanation than I can.
Well, first of all, Putin's the only one that wanted apparently Minsk to work.
Yes.
It wasn't Putin that backed away. We know that Macron's predecessor, Francois Hollande, the president of France, has admitted that Minsk was a sham, that it was never meant, that the West, France, Germany, and Ukraine, never intended Minsk to be implemented, that it was always designed as a vehicle to buy time so that NATO could build up a Ukrainian army capable of recapturing the Donbass. And it was this rebuilt American gave us time to arm ourselves. I mean, good Lord. It's straight there. I mean, there's no debating here. This isn't a matter of, interpretation. They've just straight up and said, no, Minsk was just there to buy time. The Ukrainian army was surrounded by the Russians in a village, I'll butcher it, begins with a D, Debaltseve or something of that nature. They were surrounded. It was a smaller army at the time. And the Russians you could have gone in and killed several thousand of them and ended the Ukrainian military right there. And the Ukrainians turned to the French and the Germans and said, please intervene, get Putin to not pull the trigger. And so they went and they said, come on, man, let's be about peace. Putin's like, these guys started the fight and they were raping these Russians and murdering these Russians. And they, these are the same people that kicked 40 some odd Russians out of a burning building and killed them. And they're not good people. We sort of like to finish the job here. They're like, no, give peace a chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance. And Putin went, yeah, nice song. Okay. I'll do this. I'll give peace a chance. And so he did it. And then for the next 8 years, Putin kept going, what about that peace thing? What about that peace thing? Peace, give peace a chance. All we are saying, kumbaya. And we'll do that. It's complicated. You're not actually playing right. No, we're playing fair. The rules are constitutional changes. We respect borders. No, we got it. We were there when it was written. We understand what's supposed to happen here. You guys are delaying it. Why? Well, don't worry. Don't ignore those NATO training bases over there. Oh gosh, that U.S. Army briefing that said they're training a battalion of Ukrainian forces, NATO standard, every 55 days so they can go from here to here to fight Russians. Forget about that. What the briefing officer meant to say is we're training the Ukrainian army in how to use to turn their swords into plowshares. They're not really training to fight you. They're farmers. Farmers. That's what they're doing. They're farmers. And Putin's like, well, they don't look like farmers to me, but okay, I'll trust you on this one. In June of 2021, he met with Biden in Switzerland, in Geneva, where what he kept saying is, he kept saying, all these battalions you see us moving on Russian soil that you're so concerned about, we won't need to move them if you stop training those Ukrainian soldiers to invade the Donbass. What we need you to do is implement Minsk. And Biden went, number one thing, I'm going to give instructions to Tony Blinken right now. And we're going to make implementing Minsk the thing. And Russia's like, cool, then we're done. That's all we need. All we're saying, make it happen. And, Blinken, instead of trying to get Minsk in, started almost immediately setting up the conditions to secretly arm the Ukrainians, to flow in the Stingers and the Javelins. He started that in September. And the Russians are sitting there negotiating with the French and the Germans going, hey, you get that call from Tony yet? Tony said he's going to call you. Get that call yet? No, we're still. And the Russians are going, well, wait a minute. Tony's over here giving weapons to the Ukrainians. What's going on here? And in October, they confronted the Germans and the French about that. They said, okay, we see what's happening here. Last chance. Do you or do you not want to implement Minsk? Straight up. And the French and the Germans said, no. So Macron's a lying sack of crap, because now this isn't Francois Hollande saying, we're right. This is Macron straight up saying, Macron, do not want to implement Minsk.
Yeah.
Macron's a liar. And the Russians went, good. But, because the Russians don't want war, they went, well, without Minsk, we don't have a framework to work upon here. We need a new framework. So they wrote a draft treaty. And they gave one to NATO and they gave one to the United States, said, new European security framework. We don't want war. What we want is an agreement that you guys will keep. So here it is, a treaty. We understand you might have problems here. Let's talk about it. Let's sit down and have real meaningful discussions. But it can't drag out forever, because we know, Tony, you were handing weapons out to Ukrainians because you want to invade the Donbass in March. We know this. We see it happening. Please sit down, talk to us, stop this nonsense, or else we have no choice. And we ignored them, dismissed it. Ukrainian troops started to mass in February. 60,000 started massing opposite of Donetsk. And the Russians went, okay, you asked for it, you got it. Special military operation. But it didn't happen because Russia can't be trusted.
Right.
It happened because France can't be trusted. France is the liar. France is the evil partner here. And Macron has just proven that by trying to reinvent history and put the Russians as the bad guys. No, France is the problem, not Russia.
Last question before I let you go. Will Europe and all of these conversations, all of these emergency meetings, all of these things that they're effectively having, will they be able to inhibit, subvert, get in the way of Donald Trump effectively trying to bring this war to an end?
No, they're going to advance Donald Trump's cause by their own inadequacies and incompetence, and the fact that there is no such thing as Europe. I mean, even before this meeting happened, what are the big three economies in Europe that have to work together if they're going to succeed? Forget the British.
Germany,
they're not
France,
part of Europe.
Italy.
Remember Brexit. It's France, Germany, Italy.
Yeah.
All right. So you got the Germans saying no German troops. You got the Italians going, y'all can go play boy games in Ukraine, but no Italian troops are coming. And you got Macron going, we're going to nuke Russia. And so now they're going to get together in this emergency meeting. And I guarantee you, some people are going to go, what are you talking about? Nuke Russia. And if I were the Germans, I'd say, wait a minute. You want to put French nuclear weapons on German soil? What's the legal? We already got American nuclear weapons on German soil. That's part of a NATO nuclear deterrence system that's been in place since the 1960s. Now I know that we have trouble with the Americans, but you're talking about replacing this? What agreement do we have? Is it a bilateral agreement between you and? But if it's a bilateral agreement, then it's not really a nuclear umbrella. It's just a nuclear magnet. You've turned Germany and France into a magnet for Russian nuclear weapons, and there won't be an American backstop, so we're all going to die. Are you really that stupid? And the answer to Macron is yes.
Yes.
And then the Americans should be picking up the phone going, hey, Emmanuel, how you doing, man? Yeah, hey, good meeting with you in the White House the other day. We probably should have told you you're dumber than dirt. If you seek to implement these measures that you're talking about, you will be in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I want you to remember all those discussions we had about Iran and how we're going to hold them into account, the sanctioning of Iran, the destruction of the Iranian economy, regime change, all those plans we had about Iran. Yeah, we're going to do that to you. Okay, if you are in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, you represent an existential threat to the United States of America. You execute this plan, you become the enemy. We will shut you down like a bad habit. Emmanuel, all those nuclear power plants you have. France has a lot of nuclear power plants. Where do you get the uranium from, Emmanuel? You ain't going to get it anymore because we're going to shut it down. No more uranium for France. no. And then the nuclear power plants don't work. Oh, France loses. We're used to hearing that. And we're going to hear it again. This is Macron isn't thinking. He's acting as if he's a superpower. France's superpower status only exists because the United States allowed it to happen for political reasons.
Right.
We didn't want France to withdraw from NATO. We had to maintain this front. But today, what is France? It's a pathetic middle-level European country that has no real power. 250 nuclear weapons. Gee, don't even bring that up. Because unlike the United States, which if you tried to do a decapitation strike, we would have sufficient power left over to knock you off the planet. That's why we have nuclear deterrence. France has no nuclear deterrence whatsoever. And if they want to play nuclear bang-bang games with the Russians, by themselves, by the way, walking away from Russia can literally decapitate their nuclear power that quick. France has nothing. I don't understand. If I were the Europeans, I'd be going, why are we even talking about this? Why are we even talking about this? We're setting ourselves up not just to lose, but to be destroyed in the most existential fashion. Nuclear wasteland. Macron is the most dangerous man on the planet right now. The single most dangerous man on the planet. And we need to treat him like that. We really need to call him out and say, you are literally insane. And then we need to do some of our regime change magic. There's time.
He's on his way out. He doesn't even have political legitimacy in France.
But we need to accelerate that.
Yeah. Scott Ritter, man, I always appreciate these conversations. Scott Ritter, he's a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, where can people find you today?
ScottRitter.com is a one-stop shop. You can go there and gain access to my Substack, gain access to the Russia House, which is the new Telegram channel that we're developing, and gain access to programming such as this. When you send me a link, I put it up and I put it out there. So ScottRitter.com.
Excellent, my man. Scott, thank you for this, man. Be safe. Have a good one, okay?
Thanks, you too.